Um, so I hope, this is just preliminary stuff. I hope everybody has already subscribed to Learn the Econ. That's my YouTube channel, and I upload all of this, the stuff from our classes there. Um, there are videos that are linked from um, the Ignithium site there, and sometimes I'll designate those. But if you guys want to get updates on like what's the newest material and the rest of it, then it's always uploaded there. So it's probably a good idea to subscribe. So I'll ask you, okay. So what I have open for you guys is your textbook and the section that we're dealing with right now. So if I go down here, you can see based on the reading that I posted, it's all here off of the main menu that's linked. And again, you guys can download a PDF of this, and the sections are labeled, even though they're not like chapter 1, chapter 2. Um, so right now we're starting market equilibrium, and the lecture slides that I'm going to show you guys in a minute aren't taken directly from this material, but it's very similar, and I wanted to point out some of those similarities to you. So um, the the first thing to do is we're going to look at the demand and supply together, and then we're going to note that there's a particular price at which quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, and that's our definition of equilibrium, right? It's where the two lines cross, and that means that they share that same point where at a particular price, which we call the equilibrium price, the quantity that buyers want to buy and that sellers want to sell, they're equal to each other. And that's kind of special. And you can see that there are these areas up here, B and A, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But those are areas that represent excess supply or excess demand. And the point is, when there's excess supply or excess demand, then that means that there are still either buyers, if it's on the excess demand side, or if it's sellers on the excess supply side, that are searching for someone to trade with. And so that search is going to cause this movement in prices, right? Because if I'm a buyer and I can't find a seller, well, the most common way that if you want to make a trade and you can't find somebody to trade with, and you're a buyer, you offer to pay more, right? So you bid up the price. And if the situation's reversed and there's a seller who really wants to sell at a particular price and they can't find anybody that wants to buy, then right, they normally lower their price. They have a sale. They negotiate, and that causes the price to move around. So really, the special thing about the equilibrium is there's that special price where it doesn't mean everybody's happy, but it just means that at that price, everybody who wants to trade can find a partner to trade with, and so no, nobody's left searching. They look at the price and they either want to trade or they don't. And if they want to trade, they can find somebody to trade with, and they make the trade. And that price, we call it a market clearing price because it clears all the trades from the market. And so we're going to talk a little bit about when you have prices that are not equilibrium prices, how you can end up with surpluses or shortages of a good. And so here's one example, and this is very similar to the diagram you guys will be seeing in just a few minutes, where we note at a price that's higher than the market price, you end up having this excess supply. And here your text is linking it to one of the topics we're going to talk about next, which is particular policies that force the price to be away from the equilibrium price. And one of those policies is called a price floor. and that forces a price that's higher than the equilibrium price. And there's also another type called a price ceiling that we'll talk about. But if you're curious about where we are with respect to what's being covered in your text, then now you know. And this talks a little about the stuff that we talked about before, which is the shifting of demand and supply. But the only thing I wanted you guys to note is, again, in the work that we're doing on Ignithium, we're always dealing with these linear demand and supply curves because those are very easy to illustrate and to do computations with. But generally speaking, demand and supply curves aren't linear. The only thing that's true, what we've learned so far, the recap is that demand is a relationship, and that relationship is described by the law of demand. And the law of demand just simply says that as the price goes down, consumers want to purchase more. And so that just means the curve has to be downward sloping. It doesn't have to be linear. So here, this is an example of a nonlinear demand curve where the slope is steeper, right, when the price is higher. And then as the price gets lower, then the slope gets flatter. So, that's just one way of describing what's going on here. But in any case, wherever you're at on this nonlinear demand curve, you still have a downward slope. So it obeys the law of demand. Likewise, on the supply curve, it's nonlinear, but it obeys the law of supply. As the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. So that's a quick recap of associating things with your demand and supply curves. And there's a little bit more about shifting here. Do you guys have any questions about any of that? No.
If you're having a trouble selling in the market, why don't you just switch markets? Like I know it's. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So actually, and I know who this is. I recognize your voice. Hey, Christopher, how's it going? Um, s-
Okay.
actually, we can't hear you that well. Your mic's a little bit low, volume
Oh,
wise,
hold
but I
on.
heard your
Is it any
question, so
better?
I'll repeat it. So you just said, well, why don't people just switch markets? And one of the things that I want to make clear is that what a market isn't really well defined, right? You could think about a market as being a collection of people, but what makes all those people active in a market, right? Is it because they share a geography, or is it because they share a place and time, right? So obviously there was a market for tomatoes in the 1950s, and those people probably aren't active in the market for tomatoes today. So, you know, um, so location and time and other things matter for collecting a group of individuals who are potential traders with one another. And so defining the extent of a market is really one of those things that is an open and active research question in economics. As far as I know, no one has come up with a great method for defining a particular market. But I will point out one thing, and that is that if we're talking about normally the way that we would talk about markets, it would be like the market for tomatoes, or the market for tennis shoes, or the market for electric guitars, right? And if you're trying to trade an electric guitar and you can't find someone to trade with because the price is too high, it doesn't really make sense to switch to the market for tomatoes, because that's not going to help you get an electric guitar. So, so as long as we have these sort of product-based definitions, which is normally like a first pass at trying to define a market, then it's not really possible for people to find someone to trade with just because they switch markets. Hope that makes sense.
I
Um,
see.
Yeah.
Thinking about more the rare context, like for example, say you want to sell a Lada in the United States. I don't think that's, even though they're cheap, you're not gonna. It's gonna be hard to sell a Lada compared to like maybe in the post-Soviet Union. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I actually wonder, right? Because there's probably people that want to buy those here
I mean,
because
I
they're
want
rare.
to, but no one else does.
But anyway, I can't give you a better answer than one that I gave. So I'm gonna move on. Um, but your curiosity is appreciated. Thank you. Um, so now, so we've talked about supply and we've talked about demand. I won't do a detailed recap, but I will tell you guys that the most important things that we've covered so far fall into five main points. The first one is the law of demand. The second one is the law of supply. So if you don't understand what the law of demand or law of supply is, then you need to go back and rewatch the videos or do some more reading. Those are really important concepts. And then the next one is to differentiate between a movement along a given demand or supply curve and a shift in a given demand and supply curve. So if I say to you, what's a movement along as opposed to a shift, or just what's a movement along a demand curve, a movement along a supply curve, and you're drawing a blank, then again, go back and watch some previous videos or do some more reading because there's something missing there. You should know movement along at this point. And then the last thing, and there are actually two because I said I was going to give you five. Um, it's the things that shift the demand curve and what it means to shift the demand curve, right, left or right, to have an increase or a decrease in demand. And then the last category is the things that shift the supply curve. Again, a shift being a movement either left or right, depending upon whether it's a decrease or an increase. So that's what we've covered so far. And now we're going to talk about um, and we've been discussing this so far, but about the concept of equilibrium. And so conceptually, equilibrium refers to a situation in which the price has reached a level where the quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded. So that's conceptually what's going on. And so we have at that point we have this equilibrium price, and then you notice we start to use language like this. If you are trying to talk about economics metaphorically, and every discipline kind of has this way that it adopts language to interpret what's going on um, with the phenomenon or phenomena that they're studying. And so in electrical engineering, I knew a guy one time that had a PhD in electrical engineering, and he was talking about um, electricity and how it flows through circuits and about the difference between their measures of amperage and voltage and things like that. And he liked to use as a metaphor um, the idea of water running through pipes because he could talk about water pressure, and that's something that's more intuitive to most people than talking about voltage, for example. So that was kind of his metaphor for describing what he was studying. Well, in economics, we have this metaphor of competition. I mean, the only thing that's really happening is that some people in the market are trading and other people in the market aren't trading. So does that mean that people are really, competing in some sense for goods and services or for resources? Well, maybe. Um, but the fact is that all we really observe is that there are some people that are engaged in this behavior where they trade money for goods or goods for other goods um, with other people in society and at certain times, and there are other people that don't. So, you know, are the traders out competing the non-traders? I don't know. It's, it is what you want to call it, you can call it. But in economics, we think of it in terms of competition because that's a useful way to kind of access the intuition. The other place where you see this sort of intuition come about is this notion of equilibrium, because equilibrium means, and you guys might be familiar with more dinner table conversation idea of equilibrium as being, things are in balance, the forces are in balance. um, so that's what we're talking about here. When we talk about the equilibrium price, we're saying there's this price that balances the quantity supplied with the quantity demanded. All we mean is that at that price, everybody that wants to make a purchase at that price can make one, and everyone that wants to sell a unit of the good at that price can sell it. So quantity demand and quantity supplied are equal. Graphically, and this is what we'll be paying attention to most of the time, it's the point of intersection of the demand and the supply curves. So that's how we identify it. And I often tell students that I think equilibrium is one of the easiest concepts for students in beginning classes, because it's like a pirate map. If you're going to pick one point on the map that matters, it's where X marks the spot. There's obviously something important going on there, or there wouldn't be a little X on that spot. And so, you know, if you're looking at the graph of demand and supply, something special is going on where those two curves intersect, where they meet. And equilibrium quantity is simply the quantity associated with that point. So hopefully that's clear. It shouldn't be confusing. I want to point out, though, that remember, even though most of the time we're dealing with demand and supply curves, and we just look where X marks the spot, we can actually look at demand and supply represented as these supply schedules and these demand schedules. And remember, because those are the points that we're plotting on our demand and supply curves. So the point is, if we were looking at the demand and supply schedules, we'd be able to see that none of the rows match up with one another, right? In terms of both of the entries, the price and the quantity being the same, except for one. And so here in this example, you notice at a price of 2, the quantity demanded is 7. And for supply at a price of 2, the quantity supplied is 7. So that it doesn't matter which table you're on, the entries match. And that's also another way of describing the equilibrium. There's a price at which the quantities are the same. So we can represent that with the demand and supply schedules too. Okay, so here's our graph. There's our equilibrium point, and you can see the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So one of the things that becomes really important in what we're going to be doing next, I would say, is kind of like the next big concept, and where we actually get into policy. And so this is kind of curious, and I'll take a comment or two. So, Carlos, are you there today? Carlos? No. How about Luke? Are you here?
Hi,
Hey, Luke, how are you doing?
I'm all right. It's a little
Okay, so
smoky outside.
what's that?
A little smoky out.
Yeah, it has been, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had ash falling around me. I live in Fullerton.
Also,
So,
that's
uh, now let's see. I'm gonna have you on deck in a minute because want you to respond to this question. And let's see who else is here. How about Luce? Are you there? Luce Gomez? Okay. And if you guys put something in the chat, I can't see it because I can't have everything up at the same time. But I'm looking for people that have mics, and so I'll say, uh, what about Miranda? Miranda Juhas, you there?
Hello?
Miranda, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to respond to this question too, just so we have two people on deck, so I don't spend a lot of time. Um, and obviously, other people can have a comment. So, so the question that I'm interested in you guys answering is like, do you ever think that prices are unfair? Like that you just feel that? And I'll give you a couple of examples, and maybe you guys can. These are ones that are most commonly complained about. Housing prices are just too high. It's like not fair. Like they should be lower. And because people need a place to live, I'll just put that one out there. And then another one that's common for people to complain about is gas prices. You don't see it a lot now, but about 5 years ago, gas prices in Southern California were really close to $5 a gallon, just depending upon where you were. They were over $5 a gallon, like in Malibu and places like that. But like gas prices are just unfair. And then I'll give you another one. So that's prices are just too high. And then sometimes people feel like prices are unfair because they're just too low. And the most common one there is like, I'm just not getting paid enough at my job. My wages should be higher. So, so okay. Um, so my two commentators. Um, so Luke, do you feel that or
Yeah.
yeah, okay?
Uh,
So tell me how you feel.
okay. I think everyone in this Zoom call could probably relate to seeing how ridiculous some of the textbook prices can be,
Ah,
and just educational material, just like um, I don't know. It's a thing. It's sometimes it's a matter of principle, for me,
yeah.
but other times it's just like this is insane how expensive it is. I could find some John Green video that explains it for free, you
Yeah,
know?
actually, so I sympathize as a longtime student myself. And I also want to point out two things because, like I said, I have college students, and I just end up spending $100 for my daughter's online psychology textbook. That's just one example, one class she's taking right now, and I get it. And also, as an aside, that's why even though, um, because we have our homeworks and stuff like that, that's the reason why even though it's maybe not the slickest product out there, I adopted the Ignithium materials because I thought they were a lot more reasonable. But yeah, I feel you on that one. And what about so was there something else though more in the market, or is it just like textbooks that annoy you, or is there something else, Luke?
Um, I think it's the real expensive ones are the ones that are like Ignithium but are really expensive and have an online service. To me, because things like that just in high school were free and pretty simple, like Google Docs.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, thinking in class material, that's probably the stuff that is really expensive.
So you don't ever think about housing prices or gas or
Oh, I do, but you already
or
used these
oh
examples.
yeah, okay. So your other one was it was textbooks. Okay. You never think Starbucks is too expensive.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I try to avoid it. I always get that offer. Hey, what do you want from Starbucks? I'm okay this time. If like the second time this week, it's okay. I'll pass.
Okay, cool. So, and then I'll ask you, Miranda, what about you? Do you ever like look at prices and you're just like, this is just unfair?
Yeah, I mean, like with the Starbucks, definitely, because I can just make tea at home. But
Oh
like if
yeah,
I'm
like
at
the
work,
coffee,
yeah.
right? I
But if
spend
I'm at
uh,
work, I can't even.
I
Sorry.
spend I spend $5 on a big container of Folgers, and that's like the price of like one frappuccino.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I can make tea at home, but then if I'm at work, I need to like buy something real fast from Starbucks. So it's like $4 to get like a thing of tea. So I mean that's
Yeah.
kind of expensive considering.
Yeah, I know, but obviously I think there's like the convenience
Yeah.
and also so it's a little bit different product, right? And then I also have to say like for a long time I was a big fan of like the medicine ball teas that you can get
Oh,
at
okay, yeah.
at Starbucks. I mean, I was actually surprised because like if you have a headache or something like that and you drink one of those, it completely, it's like taking a couple of Excedrin, at least for me.
Oh, I've never really tried it.
Well, yeah, you should ask them sometime if you want to like, chill out. The
Yeah.
medicine ball tea, I can recommend it. It'll set you back $4, but I think you're getting something
Yeah.
there. Well, anyway, I guess you guys kind of reinforce the idea that people can look at markets sometimes and they can say, "Hey, listen, there's just this is just unfair." And I noticed that you, Christopher, you had your hand up for a minute. Did you want to chime in and say something?
Um, well, I was saying that I use this service called Red Shelf, and most colleges have it. So you can rent a really large $100 book for about $20 per semester, and I
Right.
save a lot of money with that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of options becoming available, and like I said, for me, um, the product that I used to use before was like $120. It's called Aplia, and so even though maybe it's a little bit more slick, um, the alternative like Ignitium was much less expensive. Anyway, so. Um, uh, Getting back to our example at hand, we're talking about excess supply. So one of the things we want to kind of connect up here is that, sure, it is possible that, for example, the government could regulate the price. Like one of the things that Luke was kind of talking about in passing is that well, like when he was in high school, there were a lot of materials that were available, and I don't honestly really know um, what materials were used or what they had access to. But the big difference is that K through 12 education is completely subsidized by the government, so you guys aren't seeing the cost directly; it's coming out of taxes. Um, but when we talk about market transactions where you're actually paying for something and you're making a choice, then sometimes the government does regulate those things, not by subsidizing them, not by purchasing them on behalf of society and collecting the money to do that through taxes, but instead the government just sets some price that's different from what would normally appear in the market. So here, this is an example of what you saw in your textbook is called a price floor, and we'll talk more about that. But the thing to notice is that the equilibrium price is at $2. And you might ask yourself, okay, at a price of 250, if the government for some reason decided that $2 was the wrong price for ice cream cones, would there be anything bad or wrong about setting the price at 250, saying no? Maybe they say ice cream is bad for people, and so when the price is at $2, it's too cheap, and they purchase too much. So we're going to raise the price and make ice cream more expensive, so people don't buy as much because it's bad for them. Well, before analyzing that in detail, the most important thing is that you guys notice that at this non-equilibrium price, at this price above the equilibrium price, there's a difference between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. So in this example, at 250, buyers only want to buy 4 units, but sellers want to sell 10 units. So there's this excess supply, or what we sometimes refer to as a quantity surplus, right? There's more supply in terms of quantity available than there are a number of buyers that want to purchase. So the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. So the next connection to make up is that, well, whenever you have this kind of a surplus, this excess supply, then you also have to think, well, if you have that excess supply, is it going to cause any waste of resources? You know, if the price is artificially high and sellers are producing more than buyers want to purchase, is that something that might be bad for society in a way? And potentially there is, and we'll talk about that more in a couple of lectures. But whenever you have this price that's above the equilibrium price, notice that there's this incentive for sellers to lower their price. So it causes downward pressure on the price and pushes us back toward equilibrium. Again, if there are too many sellers, they can't find someone to buy their good. Likely they're going to compete with one another by lowering their price. So when you have excess supply, then there's downward pressure on the price. And the main point of observing that right now is to notice that the market tends to stabilize itself. It tends to push itself toward the equilibrium price. And so if there's excess supply, it causes downward pressure on the price. Okay. And there's this next slide. Okay. Yeah. So that summarizes it. When price is above equilibrium price, then quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. There's an excess supply, or what we call a surplus, and suppliers tend to lower their price to increase their sales and thereby move towards equilibrium. Now, you can also have a shortage, and here's what happens when you have a shortage. This is what the diagram looks like. Notice that in this case, for some reason, you know, the government might say, oh no, the price of ice cream is $2, that's too high. We want to mandate or pass a law that says the price of ice cream has to be only $1.50. And we'll talk about that again in more detail as a price ceiling. But to notice, in that case, you have the opposite situation. You have this thing we call a shortage or excess demand. And if you've got a price that's lower than it normally would be, then you have a quantity demanded, in this case, of 10, but sellers only want to sell, the quantity supplied is only 4. So you've got more buyers in the market than you have sellers. And then those buyers will begin to compete. And absent some regulation mandating the price, they'll place upward pressure on the price. They'll begin bidding the price up. And so here's the analysis with a shortage. When you have a price that's less than the equilibrium price, then the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. There's excess demand or shortage. Suppliers will raise the price due to too many buyers chasing too few goods supplied. And that'll create this upward pressure on the price, moving it back towards equilibrium. So markets have this kind of these stabilizing forces that move them towards equilibrium when they're out of equilibrium, right? And so a lot of times that's summarized by this law of supply and demand. And it's just this claim that the price of any good adjusts to bring the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded into balance. Notice again that those sort of price pressure dynamics that we were talking about don't exist at the equilibrium price. There's no buyer or seller that's trying to trade that can't find somebody to trade with. Okay. And my dog is barking. So, okay. So, let's move on. Okay, so now we want to talk about how we can get a change in equilibrium. And so normally what happens is there's this 3-step process. you're going to be confronted with a situation where either the demand or the supply curve is going to shift. Sometimes it'll be a situation where both are shifting, but that's pretty rare. Normally, you just have one shift at a time. And so then you have to decide whether the curve is going to shift to the left or to the right. And then you can use that shifted curve to find a new equilibrium. So I'll give you guys an example here in the next illustration. So here's our initial demand curve, demand for ice cream. And then here's the initial supply. Now, it says here that hot weather increases the demand for ice cream. And I want you guys to think back for a minute and let's take a look. So, okay. Okay. So this is our list of things that shift the demand curve. Okay. Well, we say a movement and the price is just going to be a movement along the demand curve. But if there's a change in income, the price of related goods, tastes, expectations, or the number of buyers, that can shift the demand curve, right? That's our list of things that we know of, right? And then this is our list of things that can shift the supply curve. Again, a price is just a movement along the supply curve if we change the price. But if there's a change in input prices, technology, expectations, or the number of sellers, then that can cause a shift in the supply curve. So let's begin our analysis of ice cream shifting. Okay, so I'll go back to you, Luke. How you doing? Luke? Luke? Oh, maybe Luke has stepped away. What about you, Miranda? You still there?
Yeah.
Okay, so remember we had these 3 steps, okay? So what we're given is there's a change in the weather. Now, does that sound like something that would shift the demand or the supply, and why?
Yeah, I think that would change the demand
And,
because I mean, like, why would you want to get like a really hot beverage during a a heat wave, you know?
yeah. But remember that we had those categories. Like,
Right.
are we changing the consumer's income when the weather
Oh,
changes? Are we,
um, I don't think so.
no, that's not obvious, right? Are we changing the price of a related good? If we like, what's a substitute for ice cream? Maybe it's frozen yogurt. Did we change the price of frozen yogurt?
Probably
No,
not.
right? And a compliment is something that would go with ice cream, like cones and ice cream, right? It's ice cream cone, right?
Right.
So, did we change the price of cones? No, we didn't do that. And so, the next category is tastes. Did something about the consumer's tastes change because of the hot weather, you think?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, I think it fits in that category, right? Like you were saying, in taste is this big kind of like catch-all if it's not one of the other ones. But yeah, I think it fits, right? On a hot day, I don't know about you, but I'm much more likely to part with the $4 to get a frappuccino.
Yeah.
And I'm also more likely to go to the frozen yogurt shop or to go down to Cold Stone and get some ice cream or buy a carton of ice cream from the grocery store. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that people have this increased taste for ice cream. So that's represented by the shift to the right. And now on supply, and this is one of the things that confuses people, is they say, hey, well, maybe the supply of ice cream increased because of the hot weather. Well, you know, to be clear, it doesn't fit into one of our categories, right? It's not like the weather is going to change the technology for producing ice cream. I mean, you
Mhm.
agree with me, right? Like,
Yeah.
no. And it's not going to affect the price of an input to ice cream directly. It's not like you use heat to produce ice cream.
Yeah.
So, it's not like you're getting like free heat from the sun or something like that. So, and the expectations categories of both demand and supply are a little bit difficult to interpret. It's true, but like I said before, it normally has something to do with, oh, your idea about, you know, something's going to happen in the market in the future influences your demand today. And so, I don't see that that's obvious either. So, and you're not changing the number of buyers or sellers in the market if we're defining it, based in the normal way. It's the market for ice cream and normally in a geography like, Los Angeles. So we haven't changed any of the supply factors. So supply is stable. And so you've got this new crossing point for the new demand curve D2. And can you tell me, Miranda, what do you notice? And it's labeled on the diagram, but as you compare equilibrium 1 with equilibrium 2.
What do I notice with it?
Yeah, I mean, how would you contrast these equilibria?
Um,
What's different about them?
I mean, the equilibrium's a little more like expensive, I guess. It's just 50 cents more.
Yeah, so you had a increase in demand holding supply constant, and you got an increase in the equilibrium price. And you also, did you notice down at the
Yeah.
bottom? Yeah, there's an increase in the quantity of the good traded. So ice cream prices go up, and more people buy and sell ice cream. There's more ice cream being traded. So so that's like a standard analysis and of a increase in or a shift in demand. It could be a decrease if we were moving the other direction, but this is an increase example. So and the other thing that's kind of interesting, and I'll just point it out in this slide. So the shifts in curves versus movement along curves. Okay. Um, in this previous diagram, this shift in demand merely caused a movement along a given supply curve. The supply curve was stable. We don't even need the demand curves to see if the price of ice cream goes up, that suppliers supply more. They go from supplying 7 units to supplying 10 units. So there occasionally will be questions um, where you're just considering a movement along from one price to another price, and it's important to differentiate between those things. So a shift in the supply curve is called a change in supply. A movement along a given supply curve is called a change in the quantity supplied. A shift in the demand curve is called a change in demand, and a movement along a fixed demand curve is a change in the quantity demanded. Just so the language is clear. And here's another example, and we're doing in the ice cream market again. And here again, we could go through the same analysis like I just did with Miranda, but the important part is to notice here the change that we're contemplating is an increase in the price of sugar. Now, if we went through all of our factors, um, it wouldn't be obvious that demand would change for any of the reasons that demand typically changes or shifts. So then we go next and we say, well, would this affect supply? Would it shift supply? And it turns out, and most of you guys probably know this if you've ever made ice cream at home, normally at some point in time, somebody gives that a try. and you need sugar, and an increase in the price of sugar um, is going to, based on our analysis, it's increasing in input cost. It's kind of going to cause a reduction in in supply of ice cream. So that's going to be a movement to the left. So we go from S1 to S2. We have a new equilibrium. And notice, right, to contrast this with our previous example, now we have this reduction in supply. We still end up with an increase in the equilibrium price of ice cream, but now we've got a reduction in the quantity that's traded. We go from 7 units being traded at the initial equilibrium to only 4 um, in this new equilibrium. So this chart is really useful, and if you guys want to take a picture or write something down in your notes, or take a picture to write it down in your notes later, rather than reviewing the whole lecture, um, I think this is probably, if not the most useful slide, the one of the most useful slides in our lecture today. And so you can see all of the different cases, and the ones that I want to point out to you is that so obviously if you got no change in supply and no change in demand, then the equilibrium is going to be the same. No change in demand and increase in supply, then you're going to have a decrease in the price and the equilibrium quantity is going to go up. And no change in demand and a decrease in supply, like our last example, you have an increase in the equilibrium price and a decrease in the equilibrium quantity. This type of analysis is called qualitative analysis because we don't have magnitudes that we're attaching. We're just saying, oh, things will go this way. And a lot of the times in the news and people that do, stock market trading and stuff like that, this type of analysis dominates their thinking. They just know based on something that's happened, like maybe a bad storm hitting Florida, that's going to decrease the supply of oranges, which is going to affect the price of orange juice. And it's going to cause the price of orange juice to increase in particular, and then they'll trade off of that knowledge. They'll buy orange juice at a cheaper price and watch the price go up and sell it and make a profit. So a lot of what we'll be talking about in this class has to do with these qualitative results. We can see how something's going to change relative to what it was before. But like we saw in our diagrams, if we use a specific example, we can actually measure the size of those changes. And a lot of economists that are trying to be more precise in their analysis, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, they try to actually find ways to estimate how much the price is going to change. But at this point in time, we can find directions in a lot of cases, but not in all cases. So I want to point out in particular these categories where one of the variables becomes ambiguous, right? So for example, if you have an increase in demand and an increase in supply, then the quantity that's going to be traded in the market, the new equilibrium, is going to be bigger. So quantity is going to go up, but you won't know if the price is going to increase or decrease. And if you think about it, that's pretty obvious, right? You could have this really small increase in demand. So it's almost the same as the old demand curve, but you get a big increase in supply, and that's going to drive the price down. But if the opposite was the case, it was a small increase in supply, but a big increase in demand, then that's going to drive the price up. So you have to be careful, and sometimes, and I don't think there are many cases in this class, but you'll see questions where there's an increase and in one variable and a decrease in the other. So you have an increase in supply and a decrease in demand. And in that case, where you've got both demand and supply changing, unless you have more information, you can't always tell what's going to be going on. So this is a summary for you guys on that point. And that's actually the close of the lecture material that I have to talk about today. So